Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Abby and this is Abby Reads. So for November we tried something new. We tried a TBR jar where I drew some prompts and we picked a TBR of 7 books and we need to talk about it. This is what I was supposed to read and I realized that The Spell Shop is not a debut novel, but One Dark Window is, so I just flip-flopped Spell Shop and One Dark Window. And I tried Unwell Women, but I got like 3 paragraphs in and I realized that it's not for me because they couldn't define what a woman was, and it is supposed to be a book about misogyny in healthcare. And so I didn't want to continue reading that. So I picked another nonfiction book, and my new TBR looked like this. And so this is what I read. I read 6 out of 7 books on my TBR. I did not get to The Princess Bride. That's okay. That's okay. I did read 18 books in November though. So let's jump in and talk about the books that I did read. The first book that I read was How to Become the Dark Lord and Die Trying. I haven't heard anything about this book, but it is about this young woman, and basically she's stuck in a time loop. It almost kind of reminded me of like a video game, because she would die and then like respawn in the same spot, but then she'd have to like relive the same scene over and over and over. So you're following her story and she's like, oh, this is life 200 and something. So she's done this quite a bit. You're following the life that she gets it right for the most part. And it's really interesting to see how this world is built. There's orcs and elves and a very unique magic system where you eat rocks and you gain those abilities. And she is a human and she's not supposed to be able to eat these rocks and have these magical abilities, but for some reason that she does. And she decides that she's going to become the Dark Lord in this lifetime. It was really good. It was funny. And I ended up giving it 4 stars. My only drawback is that this book, for as much peril as this character is in, she's very raunchy. She talks a lot about how she wants to do things with other characters, and that really threw me off for a good chunk of the book. Other than that, I thought it was a great book. There's a new one coming and I'm excited to pick that one up. I will say that this is definitely an adult book. There are some spicier scenes in the book. So the second book that I read for November was Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. Let me tell you, this was a Riley Sager month. The library holds for Riley Sager just kept coming for me. Home Before Dark. This is a book about this girl, and she grew up in a home that her father wrote a book about because supposedly it was haunted. And as a little girl, she doesn't remember anything from her childhood. Well, her dad passes away and she finds out that they never sold the home. So she ends up inheriting it. And her mother is like, stay away. Do not go back. Stay away from there. It's dangerous for you. And she's like, whatever. I'm going to go anyway, of course. She ends up going back to her childhood home and kind of experiencing what she went through as a child. I really like the way that this is written because you have excerpts from the father's book and then you have the real-time point of view, what's happening in the house. Riley Sager's a really unique author where he makes everything seem like it's paranormal, like alluding to ghosts or haunting or something like that, and then he kind of explains it away in the end. So I really like that about him. Home Before Dark was a 4 stars for me. Legendary was the next book that I read by Stephanie Garber. This is the second book in the Caraval series. There's a vlog about this. You guys can go watch my finishing series vlog and I'll go into greater detail there. It wasn't a terrible book. There were some issues and I definitely will not be continuing this series. I ended up giving Caraval 3 stars. That's Not My Name by Megan Lally. This book is about a young girl and we hit the ground running with this book. She wakes up in the middle of the woods. She's covered in dirt and blood and basically says, I think I'm dead. She doesn't remember anything about herself. So she ends up going to the police station. She's picked up by a police officer, thank goodness. And this man shows up saying, hey, this is my daughter. Her name is Mary. I have all of her papers back at my house. Like, this is what's going on with my daughter. And so police officer says, okay, go with your dad. And then we have the other perspective in the book named Drew, and Drew is a teenage boy whose girlfriend has gone missing, and unfortunately Drew is accused of murdering his girlfriend. So it was a very interesting perspective. This book kept me on my toes. I didn't want to put it down. I just kept reading and reading and reading. I read this book in like 2 days because I wanted to know what the heck was going on. I wanted to know Mary's real identity. I wanted to know if Drew actually murdered his girlfriend, like what happened. So the end had me screaming, but it was so good. 4 stars. This is a young adult book. I know it's not for everybody, but it was such a good thriller for a young adult thriller. Next, I read Spy Family Volume 12. I'm not going to tell you what these books are about because every other wrap up I've done with these, I tell you what they're about. So I love the series. I'm going to continue reading the series. I'm just waiting for the 13th installment to come to my library. Next, I read A Dark and Secret Magic. The book is about this woman named Hecate, or Kate as her friends call her. And Hecate is a hedge witch. So she can bring life to things, and she can cook magic into food and it'll make you feel better. She's about to turn 30 or 31 this year, and so she is on the verge of having her magic sealed by her coven. That is just their tradition and their coven, and it is supposed to seal all other magics away from what your focus is, and therefore you'll only have access to your focus. And then a dark brooding man comes along and explains to her that being a hedge witch is not just giving life and cooking good food. So there's more magic that she should have access to just as a hedge witch. And this book was so good. I loved all of the descriptions of the food in this book. I loved the romance in this book. I love the sister relationships in this book. And it very much reminded me of like a Hades Persephone retelling almost. It was good. It was really good. I gave this book a 4.5 stars. If you like witchy books, this is it. This is a good one for you. Next, I read Cackle by Rachel Harrison, and after reading A Dark and Secret Magic, I was expecting like another witchy romance book, and it was not. Cackle is about this woman named Annie, and she is dumped by her long-term boyfriend, and she ends up taking a teacher job at a small town. She's never been to this town before. She just sees an ad online, and she's like, okay, cool. It comes with a place to stay as well. She shows up, and she meets this woman named Sophie, and she goes to this farmer's market and realizes, like, people are treating Sophie very differently. They're like admiring her from a distance, but also very like wary of her. So as Annie and Sophie grow closer, it is very obvious that there is magic afoot in this town, and things get really weird. Sophie gives a spider to Annie to befriend, and it sounds really, really adorable, this spider, okay, but then I have to remind myself, it's still a spider. Parts of this book felt like a fever dream. If you're going into this thinking there's going to be a romance, there's no romance. And I don't even like the friendship very much. It's just, this book was not the best. I guess it's a 3.5. Next, I read The Spell Shop by Sarah Beth Durst. This was for my fantasy prompt in my TBR jar. And I had a lot of fun with this book. I just think that it was a little bit too long. Like, there's a 3rd act conflict, and then there's a 4th act conflict, and then there's a 5th act conflict, and I'm just like, cut it off at the 3rd, guy. Like, we don't need to keep going. This could have been more books in a series, but I think that she wanted to cram all these ideas into one book, and I just didn't vibe with that. The Spell Shop is about this woman named Keela, and she works as a librarian, and there's a revolution starting, so she decides to save some spell books from the library she works at and to return to her childhood home on a remote island. So when she comes to this island, pretty rundown. There's a few shops and some town folks there, but there's no fresh produce, so this island's not doing so hot. So Keela comes along, and she starts reading these spell books and teaching herself magic, and she starts to help the island flourish again. I really enjoyed the world building in this book. I thought it was so cool to read about different towns folk, and I kept picturing Gila as a human, but she wasn't. She has blue skin and blue hair. So I had to keep reminding myself of that. There's mer horses and little bear spirits, so it's really neat to see that. And then there's a talking spider plant as her familiar. There's a little bit of a romance. It's so sweet, and I do have a vlog coming out of me cooking recipes from this book. I was a little disappointed in the lack of food description because this is a cozy fantasy, and I really like a lot of food in these books, and there just really wasn't that much. The spell shop was only a 3.5 for me, and if you want to see more details on that, you can go to my vlog that'll come out soon. The next book that I read is Everlost by Neal Shusterman. This book was a reread for me. I originally read it in high school, and I really enjoyed it. Everlost is about these two teenagers, and they get into a car crash. They're in separate cars. They get into a crash, and they both end up passing away, and they go to the world of Everlost. And this is a very unique world where if you were on the road, you'll fall through the road like quicksand and end up at the center of the earth. You follow two teenagers, and they are trying to make it back to their bodies because they think that maybe they can go home. And so they come across Mary and they come across the McGill, and so we have two conflicting forces, and you kind of see how that changes their course. This is the first book in a trilogy, and I am hopefully going to be reading the next two soon. Everlost was a 4.25 stars for me. The next book that I read is Middle of the Night by Riley Sager. This is a story about a man who, when he was a child, he was camping in his backyard with his best friend, and he woke up and his best friend was gone, and there was a knife slash in the tent. So they thought he was kidnapped or murdered or something. Something happened to his best friend. And this book, you're following him as an adult where he has gone back to his childhood home, and he ends up getting these flashbacks to his childhood, but also he starts thinking that maybe the ghost of his childhood friend is back and haunting him. I enjoyed this book, but I didn't think it was very thrilling. There were some questions left unanswered in the end, and this was unlike any of his other books because usually Riley Sager writes from a female point of view, which I don't know how he writes such a great female point of view as a man, but he does. I really like his female point of view books. This was written from a male perspective, and unlike all of his other books, this one actually did have a paranormal aspect to it. I'm not going to say anything more than that, but I thought that was a little different for him. Middle of the Night was 3 stars for me. Up next, I read One Dark Window. This fulfilled my debut novel prompt on my TBR jar. One Dark Window is about this woman named Elspeth, and she lives in this world called Blunder, and Blunder is basically shrinking because there is a mist that is surrounding this village, and in the mist, bad things happen. The king of this world is trying to collect cards that have magical properties, and with these cards he can eliminate the mist. Well, Elspeth, when she was a child, she ended up finding one of these cards, and now she has this nightmare living in her brain, and she is afflicted by it every day, and it truly is a monster in her head. I really enjoyed this book. A lot of people say it's really dark and they couldn't finish it, but I actually didn't think it was that spooky. I didn't think it was that dark. I gave it a 4 stars, and this is a duology, so I will be picking up 2 Twisted Crowns soon. Next, I read The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. This is a story about a woman who is an actress, and she ends up going to her lake house to get away from the world and to try to get sober, or at least that's why her mom sends her there. And she ends up finding this woman who's drowning, and she saves this woman from drowning, becomes fast friends with her, and realizes that they're across the lake neighbors. And so she ends up spying on her You picture this lake house with all of these beautiful windows and it all faces the lake. You can see into every room with this pair of binoculars, and that's what our main character spends her time doing. And she realizes maybe, hey, not everything is kosher in that house, and the wife ends up going missing. So it's kind of a mystery, definitely a thriller. I liked this book. I gave this a book of 4 stars. The next book that I read is Bloom by Delilah S. Dawson. I saw Sid Bookworm talk about this book and how she just ate it up. Really, really enjoyed it. And honestly, this book was not for me. Bloom is about this woman named Ro, and she ends up going to a farmer's market and meets Ash. And Ash is described as this beautiful, ethereal being. She is just lovely, and Ro, who's always been straight before this, just finds herself wanting to be in her presence and wanting to just bask in her glory, basically. And the way that Ash is described, it almost seems like there's a magical draw about her, like something is a little off, because a lot of people are drawn to her. And I really was almost expecting a magical realism aspect of this book, but that didn't end up happening. It's a short read, it's about 200 pages, but this book really wasn't for me because Ro is almost obsessed, more so than in like with Ash. It's just really weird. 3 stars. But if you're into horror and sapphic romance, this book might be for you. Next, I read The Wedding Witch by Erin Sterling. This book is part of the X-Hex series, or the Glengrave series. This book has time travel in it, and it's set at Christmas time. There's a little bit of magic, but basically this couple is accidentally flung into the past at a funeral, and they end up staying for Yuletide, and they are stuck trying to figure out how to get home. But while they're in the past, they realize that the wedding that was supposed to happen of the male main character's great grandparents has been called off, and so he's like, if they don't get together, I'm not going to exist in the future. And so they spend their time trying to get them back together and end up falling in love in the meantime. I gave this book a 4 stars. I thought it was really cute and sweet. Next, I read Becoming Trader Joe by Joe Coulombe. I don't know how to say his last name, but he is the founder of the Trader Joe's store. I don't think I was the audience for this book, to be honest. I feel like that this was more for economy or business majors. It wasn't for me. There's a lot of technical terms in here that I did not really understand, but I did enjoy learning about how Trader Joe's stood out and how he was able to pull his company off. I honestly think that if they were to try to start this nowadays, it wouldn't work. But he does say like how he had to know a lot of laws and how he had to find loopholes around these laws, and it's almost kind of like he was a con man. It was interesting, but it wasn't for me, so I give it a 3 stars. The next book that I read is A Novel Love Story by Ashley Poston, and I really enjoyed this book. This is about Elsie, and she is supposed to go on this book club retreat with her online book club, and this is going to be the 3rd year in a row that she's going, but nobody else can go. So she actually ends up getting lost. Her car dies, basically. No cell signal. She's lost in this tiny town. And then she finds out, got lost, and ended up in her favorite book series town. And I love that idea. So she finds out that she's lost in this book setting, and she starts meeting all of her favorite characters that she loves, that she knows so well. She's read this book series many times. And then she finds this guy, and he runs the bookstore, and she can't figure out where in the books she knows him from. He knows they're in a book setting, and so something weird is going on. It was a good read. I enjoyed it. However, I will say it was a little insta-lovey, because he's very much like, get out of town, go away, nobody wants you here. And then all of a sudden, he's like, oh, please don't leave. I just love you so much. And then at the end, something infuriating happens, like right before the very end of the book, and I was so mad. I don't want to spoil it for you guys, but ooh, it made me mad. If you guys like romance novels, I think you would like this book. Next, I read The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager. Surprise, surprise, another Riley Sager book. This book is about this woman named Emma. When she was younger, she went to a summer camp, and at the summer camp, she woke up and found her bunkmates missing from the cabin, and they never reappeared. So she has been haunted by this all of her life, and 15 years later, she's asked to go back to the camp that reopened and be a camp counselor there. So while she's there, she starts reliving certain things, and she starts revealing to the reader more and more about what happened. I think that there was a lot more depth to this book compared to his other novels because there were so many moving parts and different characters compared to most of his other novels. So I think that if you want a more in-depth thriller, I would definitely pick this one up. I gave The Last Time I Lied 4 stars. And then lastly, the last book that I read in November, this is Mouse. And I have 2 books in here. And this was to fulfill my highest rated on Goodreads prompt for my TBR jar. Mouse is a graphic novel series about Art, the artist of the comic series, talking to his dad about going into the concentration camps and what led up to that, how it was in the camps, and how he got out. These books were very hard to read. There is a lot of very graphic details in this, in addition to portraying his father as how he really was, and I think that that was important to Art, but I also think that it was very hard for him because he loves his dad, but he does have a very strained relationship with his dad, and he's trying to understand him. I don't really like reading memoirs. Let me go over my statistics with you. In terms of books, I read 18 books, 1 physical, 16 audiobooks, and 1 ebook. I read a total of 6,136 pages. That is an average of 3 days per book. I read 9 female authors, 6 male authors, and 9 new-to-me authors. I read 2 middle grade, 4 YA, and 12 adult books, 7 fantasy, 2 romance, 6 thriller, 2 other, and 1 nonfiction. And then my favorite book of the month was A Dark and Secret Magic. I just loved the romance and the relationships all around in this book, and I really enjoyed the magic system and just the descriptions of food, and it made me want to make all the recipes in this book, but it's more fall vibes, so maybe next year I'll bring it back around. My chapters and cooking series, I think that that would be a lot of fun. Well, that's it for the month of November. I can't believe we're already in December. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, I appreciate your support on my channel. If you want to subscribe or comment down below, it's always appreciated. And if you don't know what to comment, comment a snowflake emoji. And I will see you guys soon in a new video. Happy reading! I'm a sweary girl today. Hold on, click clack's incoming. You gonna let me get through this? Probably not. That this is I wish I could tell you what her name was, but I can't remember. You'll ever have those people in your life where you're like, that's nice. Why can I never remember characters' names? Good boy. Oh, good boy. Yeah, you so much. You gotta help me. You gotta help me tell the people about the books. Okay. Derelict, honestly. Is that the right word? Destitute? Derelict? It's words, Abby. Words. Okay. 90s that he wrote this? I'm not really sure. Yep. Okay. You scared me. Just sit. Just sit and be pretty. Sit and be pretty. I think that is so cool. Like, I would definitely want to go get lost and end up at Hogwarts, or probably not the Hunger Games series. Probably not Pan Am. But I would definitely want to get lost and end up at Hogwarts. Or what other books do I like? Fuck. Yeah, that's the big one. That's really the big one. Okay, I digress. I feel like I'm doing a really crappy job of this. That's it. That's it. That's it. That's all she wrote. That's it, everybody. Go home.